remember whenever I first started having symptoms, like my heart would race and I'd get like really short of breath just going up like 2 or 3 stairs. I'd go to the doctor and they'd do tests and they'd say, oh, it's just because I was overweight, even though I weighed like 135 pounds at the time, 140. And then they would say that it was probably anxiety related. And as a therapist, I know what anxiety looks like. Like, obviously, I get anxious sometimes, like everybody, but it wasn't anxiety. It was really frustrating and really disheartening to like go to the doctor over and over and over and over again and like beg for somebody to listen to me and for like to feel like I was just being told that I was a liar. Like there was nothing wrong with me. I just needed to kind of like suck it up and get over it because it was my weight or my anxiety. And I remember at one point they actually prescribed me an anxiety medication. And I think that that was kind of like a turning point for me where like I knew that I either needed to like seriously advocate for myself and do something different than what I was doing, even though I was already advocating for myself, or I needed to just like suck it up, like they said, and just deal with it. Luckily, I ended up getting with a doctor that I hadn't ever seen before whenever I had a cold, and she ordered a bunch of tests and found that one of my labs were like extremely off and got concerned enough that she called me at like 7:30 at night and told me that she wanted me to see one of the cardiologists in town the next day because the labs were so off. But it took like 2.5 years for anybody to listen to me enough to do any kind of testing outside of like a Holter monitor. At the beginning, it was like the beginning of pulmonary hypertension in my head, and so it wasn't nearly as significant as it's become over the last couple of years, where I've actually needed oxygen all of the time and actually had to have a double lung transplant and all the things. So no, I don't think that I understood completely. I think that I thought that I did. I think whenever I was first diagnosed, I felt like I had won something at first. Like, finally, somebody's listened to me. Finally, there's an answer. And then, of course, like that dissipated as I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And that feeling of like winning definitely didn't feel like winning anymore. Felt scary, especially because the doctor initially told me that if the treatments didn't work, that I'd have 2 years to live. So it was a really harsh reality that I don't think that I really understood either until this last year, whenever I got sick and actually like came really close to dying and had to have a double lung transplant. I don't think that you can really understand what it means to like be that close to death until you're actually there. I would say that there's been lots of moments for example, like the first 5-ish years, I feel like things were pretty gradual. Like it just, slowly progressed to a place where maybe it was a little bit less manageable, and things like impacted me a bit differently. But then over the last like 2 to 3 years, it's definitely increased in like its intensity and my symptoms and like how it impacts me and like the things that I can or can't do or couldn't do. Like my oxygen use and things like that definitely increased pretty significantly and quickly, in my opinion. Maybe it didn't, maybe it actually was much slower than some people, but it felt really quick. Especially because I went from like needing oxygen at night to needing oxygen almost all of the time. Like quickly, it felt like a sudden shift, but considering the fact that they said 2 years if the treatments worked, if the treatments didn't work, it would be my like lifespan. I feel like maybe 5 or 6 years of needing until I needed oxygen during the day really wasn't that bad, but it felt bad, if that makes sense. Um, Definitely over the last year or two, like the things that I've been able to do has definitely shifted also. Like I couldn't walk as far, or I couldn't tolerate things as much, or like my symptoms just increased pretty significantly, pretty quickly. Well, like I said, in like late June, early July of this past year, I started feeling really bad and um, started having some really bad stomach issues. I just really felt sick and wasn't able to do a whole lot, needed more oxygen, and I attributed all of it to like just having some stomach issues, which is really common with some of my medications that I was on. So I waited several weeks, even though everybody around me was like, "Oh, you should go to the doctor. You should go to the doctor." Finally, August 19th of this past year, um, Adam talked me into going to the hospital, and I had my mother-in-law take me to Kansas City at the request of my specialist. And I went down there, and they admitted me immediately and put me in the ICU. Um, Pretty quickly, we learned that it actually wasn't stomach issues. I was in active heart failure and respiratory failure, and was retaining a ton of water because of the heart failure. And so they worked to try to get me stabilized and get the water off of my lungs and out of my stomach and all the things. My blood pressure was extremely low, so they had me on 4 different blood pressure medications continuously on the IV, and still weren't able to stabilize my blood pressure. Like, it was extremely low. There were several times, at least 3 that I'm aware of in the first couple of days, that they almost lost me, and had to have several procedures. At one point, pretty early on, like within the first probably 2 or 3 days, my specialist came in, and he said, essentially, like, there is not another option besides to get a Hickman port, which is like a port that they put into the top of your heart, like an IV that goes into the top of your heart that delivers medication like directly to your heart. That was like basically the last option, because things had gotten so bad, and so they went in and put in a Hickman port and started the medication pretty early on. Like I said, just a couple of days in, hoping that would stabilize me, and it didn't. I continued to get sicker and sicker, and so they finally, after probably 3.5 weeks, they got me stable enough that I could go home. I went over to like a regular room instead of the ICU for probably 5 days, and then I went home, and we kind of waited to see what was going to happen, if my specialist still wanted me to be assessed for a transplant, etc. And during that few days that I was home, I just continued to get sicker and sicker. So 2 days before I went back into the hospital, I went into the bathroom to go to the bathroom, and I actually was extremely lucky that my daughter happened to be in there, and I ended up passing out on the toilet, and had like what she thought was maybe a seizure. Adam called the ambulance, and they came and they assessed me, and they let me stay home, but my blood pressure was extremely low, and my oxygen was extremely low. I was able to stabilize, which is why they let me stay home. And then the next night, I got really sick again. I was barely functioning. It was blue, and my oxygen wouldn't stay up, and so they rushed me to KU again by ambulance. They wanted to life flight me, but there weren't any planes available, so they just rushed me by ambulance instead. And I went back into the ICU, where I stayed from the beginning of September until the beginning of November. And during that time, just continued to like have ups and downs. They were able to get me put on nitric oxide, which is a form of life support, as well as like really high flow oxygen. And they kept me on that the entire time that I was in the hospital. I was like at the end, I was like not really able to eat because I was so uncomfortable from all of the swelling and the water retention. They weren't able to really stabilize my blood pressure. Again, there were a few different times that like my blood pressure dipped really low and they thought that they were going to lose me. Luckily, they were able to stabilize me each time, but it was a pretty intense time for sure. The beginning of November of this past year, they called all of my family in and they had a conversation with all of us and told us, that this was like basically it, that there wasn't anything else that they could do, and that because they'd called several transplant places and they'd all rejected taking me, that I was going to die, essentially. At the very tail end, one of the nurses came in and told the doctor that Northwestern was on the phone and that they wanted to assess me. I met with the case manager just a few days later on the phone and answered a bunch of questions, and they thought that it was worthwhile for me to come to Chicago. And so about a week and a half later, we got a plane and they scheduled ECMO, which is where they go in and they put tubes into your groin and your neck, and they recirculate the blood so that way your lungs and your other organs can function properly. I don't really remember a whole lot of that, but I remember, my little sister and Adam being there and being really scared because I was going to come to a state in a hospital that I'd never been to before, and it's just a really intimidating situation. That very first night, there were lots and lots of tests and lots of procedures, and it was really scary. I remember not really knowing what to expect because nobody really told me like what this was going to look like. They just said that I was going to come here and get assessed. And over the next couple of days, I had like all the tests, a bunch of genetic testing. They looked at my teeth. They looked at all of my organs. They did cancer screenings. They did skin checks. They did all of the vaccines that they could possibly think of. I was approved to be on the transplant list, and I was put at 95th percentile of need. So 0 is like you don't have any need. 100 is like you're the most significant need. They told me that I was 95th. So on November 16th, we got the call that they had found lungs and that they thought that they were viable. They were going to bring them in and check them out, and that if they were viable, then they would go ahead and transplant. They called again and told us that they were viable, that they wanted to move forward, they wanted to do surgery. And I went in, and again, I don't remember any of that. I was told that the surgery went like on the low end of normal, which was about 8 hours. It went really routinely. Everything went fine. There wasn't any complications. And I went back to my room and started recovery. Over the next probably 2 or 3 weeks, I like actively hallucinated in the ICU and thought that like the nurses were trying to kill me, and thought that my husband was trying to take me off of life support, and just really, really crazy, bizarre dreams, which I've heard is really common with the pain medications and the ECMO and all of the things that I was kind of going through. I don't remember a whole lot. During that period of time, I had a breathing tube, and I had a feeding tube, and I had ECMO sites in my neck and groins. I had like 6 or 7 different ports for medication administration. I had my Hickman site with my pulmonary hypertension medication still going. Was in a lot of pain and really scared. Really wasn't sure what the expectation was in terms of like when those things were going to come out or like what that was going to look like. And then slowly over the next week, like things started to come out. They started to take ports out and they started to take tubes out, and it was a really bizarre and unique experience for sure. I remember at first, because I had the breathing tube and the feeding tube, I couldn't talk, so I used a dry erase board. My handwriting was not great, but I think most of the time my husband was able to differentiate what I was trying to say, at least. And then finally I started to talk a bit. Yeah, so that was kind of the initial experience right after transplant. It was definitely not what I expected. I would say that if I had to go back in time and like tell myself about assumptions and like what this would feel like, there would be a lot of things that I would like have a conversation with myself about ahead of time, because there were a lot of things that I really didn't prepare myself for. They noticed that I couldn't move my legs and they were concerned about that, but that is sometimes an expectation whenever you have a transplant, that you will lose certain sensations for a period of time, and that's not uncommon for transplant patients to experience some kind of loss of movement, or to have some temporary paralysis that they've got to work through, which is part of why a lot of patients that have transplants end up going to a rehab afterwards, because there is kind of this dual situation where that occurs also. And also just because you're really weak after having your entire chest cut open, which is what occurred. So they did a bunch of tests. They did a cervical spine tap, and they found that I had high proteins in my cervical spine fluid. And so they determined, based off of the information that they had, that they thought that I had Guillain-Barré syndrome. I never say that right. So it is a condition where essentially my body attacks the nerves and causes paralysis. For I think 60 to 80% of patients, the condition is temporary, but there is like that 40 to 20% of patients that don't actually recover, or they don't recover to an extent that, you know, is meaningful. So I essentially woke up and was paralyzed from the waist down. They're not sure whether or not I will get full movement back of my legs or not. Over this past week, starting on Monday, I sat up for the first time, and then I stood for the first time since surgery, and I actually took some steps with the help of my physical therapist, which was a really, really big thing. That happened on Thursday of this week. So lots of big things are happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be able to walk again or even have filling in my legs. I did move my legs, but I still can't really feel anything past like my knees, which is an improvement because I couldn't feel anything from my waist down. But we'll just kind of have to see how things progress.
Go ahead and try to kick that leg forward. Kick it. So, Lydia, what floors have you on?
I think one of the things that feels really important that was said to me pretty early on was like, what assumptions, like the question was posed, like, what assumptions did I make about this and myself through all of this? And I think I made a lot of assumptions about what a transplant would look like and also what I would look like through this. And I think that that wasn't necessarily helpful in a lot of aspects. And I like also made a lot of assumptions about how people would show up for me. And some people really surprised me and other people surprised me in a negative way. So I think being able to recognize that like my expectations aren't always reasonable or rational based on the information that I have is one important thing that I learned. And then the other piece is like just giving myself grace. I think I expect a lot out of myself, and I expect myself to like always do the thing. And whenever I don't, I feel really bad about it. And so, obviously, I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with. I think a lot of people struggle with giving themselves grace and like not being kind to themselves. So I know that that's not unique to me, but I think that's something that I learned about myself that I didn't necessarily say out loud before, right? Like I knew that I'm not always super like nice to myself, but also I didn't recognize like how unnice I am to myself sometimes. So just being able to like make myself slow down and give myself grace is one thing. Also just like being in a hospital for 6 months, almost 6 months on the 19th of this month, today's the 14th, having to be vulnerable and like allow other people to like step in and take care of all of my basic needs. Like that's an experience that I can't even explain to you. Needing somebody else to take care of me all of the time. It's a really humbling experience and also just really kind of a crappy experience, to be honest. I'm not used to that, and I am not used to needing somebody else to do all of the things for me. I tend to take care of most things for myself. So I think just being able to ask for help is something that I've learned. Like being able to, like, obviously I asked for help for some things before, but I think allowing myself to recognize that I needed the help and asking for it is different than asking for it in the way that I did before all of this. So, obviously things are pretty uncertain right now. I have started having some movements. Like I said, sitting, walking, or taking some first steps, standing, all of those things are really big. My physical therapist is amazing, and he's been really, really kind and really supportive, and I think really, truly like supports any of the efforts and progress that I make and gets super excited whenever something good happens. And whenever him and I met on Thursday after I took some steps, he has a plan to set me up with a walking clinic. They specialize in like helping people to successfully walk in a way that feels successful. That was stupid. They help people to regain mobility. And they also assess people for like robotics, and they help people get set up with like orthopedic assistance devices like boots and different contraptions that go into your shoe that help you to stabilize while you're walking and things like that. So I'm super excited to meet with them. I think I meet with them for the first time this week. And then, obviously the other hope would be that I'm eventually able to walk on my own, that I do gain full use of my legs. But we don't really know what that's going to look like, so I'm just trying to come up with like all of the best case scenarios based on the information that we have, and at this point, I'm doing a lot better than I was doing a few weeks ago, which is amazing. And I hope to continue to progress whenever I leave here. My plan is to go home and be cared for by my family first, and I'll do some things on my own, of course. We have to stay in Chicago until at least November 16th of 2026. I will come to day treatment, at least initially, here at the rehab for 3 days a week, and I'll attend transplant appointments at the hospital once or twice a week. So I'll stay really busy with appointments with rehab and transplant appointments, and then that will slowly decrease as time goes on. But I'll still work with my team to continue to build my ability to move and navigate, the world. I ordered my custom wheelchair earlier last week, which I'm pretty excited about. So I will get that in approximately 3 months after my discharge. They put in the order last week, so that will be something that happens. And I'm just excited to get back to work. I'm going to take a little bit more time off after I'm released from the rehab, and just kind of build my strength back up and get used to being home, since I've not been home in 6 months, and just kind of really take care of myself in a way that maybe I've not had time to do in a long time, and spend some time with family. And yeah, that's kind of my plan. Even though things feel really dark and things aren't necessarily going the way that I wanted them to go, there's still a lot of really positive things, like the fact that I'm alive and the fact that I got a donor within 24 hours or 48 hours of being enlisted, the fact that I get more time with my family. There's so many great lights in all of the darkness, and that's something that I've just really tried to remember throughout this time. It's really easy to kind of get down and negative whenever you're in a situation like this, and I just really try to stay positive and realistic, of course, but positive for the most part, and recognize, like, even though things don't feel great all of the time, there's still really great things that have happened. I think that I am really excited to be able to reach out to my donor's family, and just thank them for the sacrifice that my donor made, and the fact that I get to continue to be with my family and spend time with my kids and live my life and be a therapist and create art and do all of the things that I really want to do because of her and the decision that she made to be a donor. So I'm just grateful for that, and I'm really excited to be able to make contact with them eventually, and hopefully they're receptive, but if they're not, hopefully at least it brings them some peace, even if they don't want to have contact with me, that they did the right thing, or she did the right thing, and that it was a sacrifice that was worthwhile.